Okay. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Audit Committee. We have apologies for absence, Andrea.
Apologies from Peter Toppin.
Okay, Peter Toppin. So we are quorate. So Peter is an independent member, so we are quorate. We will move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 9th of January, which have been circulated. Everybody's had a chance to look at them. Peter, you, Councillor Jackson?
Yeah, just a small matter of arising, and I think it's a matter for a future meeting anyway, that we'll probably discuss privately. But there was mention, and it's in paragraph 38, a response to a question about the KPMG report into advance. And I think it's only fair to say that this committee will hear in future meetings about the circumstances around that, and whether or not there actually was a police investigation, and whether the report had been given to the police or not. Because there is a fear that the committee wasn't told the exact facts in the last meeting.
Yes. I think from the point of view of these minutes, I suppose they are an accurate reflection of what was said in the meeting itself. But your point is well made, is that that particular issue will be, covered. I think a little bit more detail a little bit later on in a future day, and we're expecting to see more information coming forward for that. But in terms of these minutes, I think this is an accurate depiction of what was said at that.
Yeah, only just, I think, but we need clarification in the future about the exact circumstances.
But in terms of the retrospective review of these minutes, I think we'll take it that these were correct at the time. Okay. Any more comments on the minutes, or shall we take them as read? Can we have a proposal that these are an accurate copy? Sorry. Okay. Could we have a proposal that it's an accurate copy? Thank you, Councillor Oliver. And seconded by Councillor Jackson. Thank you. We'll move on from there. So we'll move on from the minutes. Item 3 on the agenda: disclosure of members' interests. Unless already entered in the Council's register of members' interests, members are required to disclose any personal interest, which includes any disclosable pecuniary interest that they may have in any of the items included on this agenda for this meeting, in accordance with the Code of Conduct adopted by the Council. So if anybody has anything that they need to mention. No? Thank you. So we move on now to item 4 on your agenda, which is the report of the Interim Executive Director of Finance and Section 151 Officer, who is coming to us via Zoom, I understand.
Yes. Good morning, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, Jan, we can hear you fine. Thank you.
Wonderful. So through you, Chair, this report updates the committee on the timetable for publication and audit of the 21-22 statement of accounts, and updates on changes to the accounting policies that will be applied in preparing those accounts. First of all, addressing the timetable, there have been changes to the proposed timetable for 21-22, and the accounts now have to be prepared and certified by the 31st of July, and the audited accounts have to be approved by the committee by the 30th of November. That's the timetable. As far as the accounting policies are concerned, we're not proposing any changes to the accounting policies, but I did just want to provide an update on the SIPFA consultation on the 2 changes that have been proposed. First of all, to pause the requirement around valuation of property, plant and equipment, and secondly, to defer the implementation of IFRS 16 for a further year. And in the last week, SIPFA have now confirmed that they are not proposing to pause the requirement to value property, plant and equipment, but they are proposing to defer IFRS 16 for a further year. So the issue about valuation should not affect us, because we were planning to press ahead with those valuations anyway. So I don't think that that's going to have a material impact on the way we go about preparing the 21-22 accounts. But I'm happy to take any changes or any questions on those changes, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Can I just ask you, before we take questions from the floor, just to unpack the statement about SIPFA pausing their requirement? What was behind that, just for the benefit of the wider group?
Okay, so those two proposals came forward in the context of the really significant delays that there have been to the audit of accounts over recent years. So they were intended to reduce the workload associated with the audit of the accounts, and valuations having been a particularly thorny issue that have consumed a lot of time, both for the finance teams preparing the accounts, but also for the auditors in then auditing those accounts. So it was proposed as a pragmatic short-term solution to help ease that burden. In the event SIPFA decided not to progress that particular proposal, because they had mixed feedback from respondents to the consultation, and I think there was a concern about that simply storing up further work for the following year in terms of having to catch up with valuations. So although it might provide some short-term relief, in the long run it wasn't actually going to help address the issue, which is about, first of all, the complexity of the accounts, secondly, the capacity within the local audit market, and then thirdly, the increased scrutiny from regulators of audit standards, which are requiring the audit firms to actually go into issues in a lot more detail than they would have done in previous years. So I think the conclusion was that it would serve no real purpose to actually pause that requirement. And I think a number of councils, in common with us, were planning to press ahead with their valuation programmes anyway. So it wouldn't have made any difference at the end of the day. But the deferral of IFRS, which deals with the accounting for leases for a further year, is welcome. We have done quite a lot of preparatory work anyway, but you know, having an extra 12 months to ensure that we have all of the necessary arrangements in place to comply with that standard is welcome.
Okay, thank you, Jen. That makes it a lot clearer. Thank you. I'll open it up for questions from the committee now. Has anybody got any particular questions on this paper? No. It's all fine. That's good. Well, it is very clear. It is what it is, Jan, and it is clear, and it's good news that we're in a more comfortable position, possibly in this respect, in terms of the timing. Okay. Well, if there's no questions on item number 4, then we'll move on to item number 5, which is again one from yourself, Jan, which is the statement of accounts. Sorry, we have to. I beg your pardon. I'm getting ahead of myself. We have to approve the accounting policies as a group. Can we do that? Yes. I'm getting a show of hands. Yes. And we have to authorise the Interim Director of Finance to review the accounting policies as necessary and report any changes to the Audit Committee. Can we do that as well? Show of hands. Yes. Thank you. So that's so authorised and approved. Thank you, Jan. Now on to item 5, I think.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a report that we bring to the Audit Committee every year at this time in preparation for the preparation of the accounts for the financial year 21-22, and it considers which entities should be included within the group reporting boundary. So there are three potential entities for inclusion: Advanced Northumberland Limited, Northumberland Enterprise Holdings Limited, and Active Northumberland. And as in previous years, the report proposes that Advanced Northumberland and Northumberland Enterprise Holdings Limited's financial statements are consolidated with the council's statement of accounts, but not Active Northumberland, on the basis that the council does not exercise significant control over Active Northumberland. It is an independent third party that provides services under contract to the council. The council has no representatives on the board, and none of the other tests for inclusion on the basis of the council exercising significant control have been met. So the committee are asked to agree that we consolidate the financial statements of Advanced Northumberland, Northumberland Enterprise Holdings Limited, but not Active Northumberland, for the financial year ended 31st of March 2022.
Okay, thank you, Jan. I've a quick question myself for external audit. Is external audit comfortable with this as an arrangement?
So in terms of the accounting standards that you've got to follow the code of practice that applies to local government. Jan's outlined, I think, quite succinctly what the requirements are in terms of consolidation. We concur with the decision not to consolidate Active because we don't think you've got significant control. You did have, but I don't think you do now. In relation to Advance, it's a significant component because the values. North East Holdings Limited, I think that's actually a choice. So the code requires you consolidate companies, but the concept of materiality applies. So where a subsidiary or an associate or a joint venture is material to the council's group, you must consolidate it. Where a subsidiary, an associate or joint venture isn't material to the council's group, you have an option not to consolidate that entity. Now, there are pros and cons of both. The biggest pro being the transparency of the group structure, etc. The cons are it's a bit of a clerk, to use an audit term, to produce group accounts and do all consolidation adjustments, etc. So it's clearly a decision for the council, and we would always encourage our clients to consolidate to show that transparency of the group structure and the total liabilities and assets and financial performance of the group. But clearly that is a decision to make. So if Jan's proposing to consolidate, we would support that decision. If Jan was saying we're not going to consolidate, bluntly we would ask Jan for a representation when we come to the end of the audit to say, why are you not consolidating this entity into the group? Jan's answer would probably be materiality, and we would say, fair enough, but can we just revisit the related party disclosures and accounts? So all makes sense, absolutely 100% correct to the report, and transparency in terms of disclosure of the group is definitely the best way forward.
Okay, thank you for that, Cameron. Any further points to raise? And Councillor Daly.
Yes, thank you, Jan. Just to agree with obviously Active Northumberland, because that was set up as a charity originally. This was going back to when we set up Leisure Tyndale, and obviously it's got to be arm's length, so we don't have any control over it. What I can't remember, and this is just a question, Active Northumberland actually are, they look after and maintain our buildings that actually belong to the county council. They're part of the structure. Are they actually incorporated in their accounts, or are they incorporated into the county council's building?
Okay, so they do use our buildings, but we retain ownership, and so the buildings are included on our balance sheet, not Active Northumberland's.
Thank you. That's all. I just couldn't remember. Okay. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Any more questions on this before we move on to? Okay, well, it seems fairly straightforward, and I thank External Audit for clarifying as well their position on this. So what we've been asked to do here is to note the contents of this report, note the financial statements of Advanced Northumberland will continue to be consolidated with the Council Statement of Accounts for the financial year end 31st of March 22. Note that Northumberland Enterprise Holdings Limited financial statements will be consolidated with the Council Statement of Accounts, and agree that Active Northumberland's financial statements should not be consolidated with the Council Statement of Accounts for the financial year ended 31st of March 22. So can we agree on a show of hands whether those statements are acceptable to the committee? Yes, I'm taking that as confirmation. Okay, thank you, Jan. I think that one is done and dusted. Moving on.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I think we've actually covered most of the ground anyway in relation to changes to the Code of Practice for local authority accounting for the financial year 21-22. So the committee is asked to note the changes which are set out in the appendix, which we will be having regard to in preparing the 21-22 statement of accounts, but I think I've already covered the SIPFA consultation, the outcome of that, and so it's only if members have any further questions on this that I'll be happy to take them, but I don't want to repeat myself.
Oh, absolutely, thank you, Jan. Okay, well, bear in mind we have covered most of this in the previous paper. Are there any more questions around this particular? No, nothing. So, okay, well, this one is just a note, so nothing to vote on here. So thank you, Jan, for bringing that to the committee, and we will move on. So that was item 6. We move on now, and I think this one is the Corporate Fraud Team Counter Fraud Interim Report, item number 7, and I think this will be presented by Zoom as well, I understand.
Chair, I understand Gareth, who actually wrote the report, is there in person?
No, I've had to.
Oh, you're on Zoom. Okay, sorry. Apologies, Gareth. So I'm going to allow Gareth to introduce this report, Chair. But before I do that, can I just say that as members of the committee may be aware, we actually lost Barry Haig, who's has been our corporate fraud team leader for a number of years. We lost him in January after a short illness, and I just wanted to pay tribute to Barry and the sterling work that he's done over many years for the council, and I'm sure the audit committee would wish to acknowledge that as well.
Absolutely, Jan, and yes, I heard the sad news myself, and he was a great servant of this council and this county. So I think it should be put on record that we send our condolences to his family and appreciations for all the, as you say, sterling work that he did over the years. So thank you for that. Okay, so item 7 is the counter fraud interim report. So we have Gareth on Zoom.
Yes, that's me. So the interim report covers the period April to September when Barry was still in post as manager. So it's an update on that. The main areas where we received referrals were around revenues and tenancy, so council tax and tenancy fraud. Specifically with the tenancy, a lot of that was right to buy checks, which we've done for many years, where we've carried out comprehensive anti-money laundering checks and tenancy checks on every right to buy application. And the work we do is the results we get kind of shown with the withdrawals where anti-money laundering checks aren't met. I think that's something that Barry brings to Audit Committee when he puts these reports forward, and has done for a number of years. The same around the council tax revenues referrals we get, where there's council tax reduction for the council to investigate, for the team to investigate around potentially fraudulent council tax reduction applications and claims. That being said, it's obviously been a period where we've had to adjust the work we do. For the period April to September, we looked at the COVID isolation grants, where an isolation grant was submitted and a reduction in income wasn't demonstrable. So we've actually recovered those, which is kind of testament to the team that we've been able to pick up work when other things have kind of tailed off during the COVID lockdown period. And like I say, they're the two main areas contained within the report. We look at things like insurance, school applications. We also do partnership work with Benicia and Carbon for their right to buy and right to acquire applications. But that's all set out within the report. I don't know if there's any questions.
Right, thank you, Gareth. Okay, just a quick one. When I was reading the report earlier on, I noticed that you mentioned that proactive single-person discount exercises were temporarily suspended to prevent any reputational damage due to the authority during the pandemic, the period of the pandemic. Have they been restarted now?
They haven't been restarted now. I mean, the report, like I say, runs up to September 21, and even now, as we're in March 2022, they haven't been restarted. However, that's actually a project that is to be restarted. I'm actually going to be running that project myself. We just didn't think the timing last year, without lockdown and whatnot. So yes, that will be restarted. It's a data heavy. It's a data matching process. So it's. With referrals and fraud investigation, a lot of it is success hinges on the quality of the data you get, and the reason we had the good single person discount proactive drive was because of the quality of the data. So that is something that we're looking to restart in the very near future. Yes.
Mm. Okay, so I'm quite interested in that you say it's a data intensive exercise. Is this largely done by data matching, and is it a desktop exercise?
Yeah, a lot of it is. Well, to produce the cases that we want a business on, like I say, it's credit reports against discount, but there's also the investigation where it comes out once you've churned out there, once you've got the high quality, high risk matches that you want to look at, then it comes down to investigative work and where we go from there.
Mm. Okay, that's fine, thank you. Okay, I'll open this one up. Any questions on this report? And yeah, Councillor Wallace.
Chair, thank you. It's a comment, not a question. Although it's a question, being a relative new member, I was not aware of this. But on page 4, I'll congratulate the officer and the team. One of the things we're very keen of in Northumberland, obviously, is to be able to house our residents. And when you see 80 right to buy applications were scrutinised in detail, and 19 were withdrawn because there was fraud attempted, what it means is we were able to continue providing council homes for tenants, and that's something to be applauded and to be grateful for. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that. I don't think that's really a question that needs a reply, Gareth, from yourself. But thank you for bringing it up anyway. Any more questions for Gareth when we've got him on the line? Councillor Dale?
Yeah, I'd just like to comment saying thank you. I welcome the fact you're actually working with outside agencies, whether it's Benicia or companies, whatever, and that actually they are using your team to evaluate and do their work for them too. So hopefully you'll be able to expand now more. I know it's lots of work to be done, but it's a really good, I remember when we started, I think it was 2015, way back then. And actually, since then, you've grown so much to actually show that you are valuable, such a valuable resource. So thank you for that. And I think, obviously, thank you to Barry, because I think he was there at the beginning too. So thank you.
Mm.
Yeah, yep. Just on that, there's a section in the report which mentions the tenancy. Let me just find that. Yeah, the Tenancy Fraud Forum, which is a regional group where we work with partnership authorities and invite the housing associations in, and it's almost a way of exchanging best practice and things. So it's an ongoing. We look to grow it, and it's the things where we work jointly to, like I say, exchange best practice, and it's something we've had great success with over the years. Mm.
Right, thank you. Well, it's quite clear from this report that this is a service which is growing and getting more mature and becoming more effective as time goes on, which is a credit to the people who've helped develop it and work at Audit for the last several years. So I think everybody seems fairly comfortable that this is in safe hands at the present time, and is a valuable resource to the council. So thank you for presenting this. Just quickly open up any more questions before we let Gareth go. No. Okay, well, thank you very much for presenting this. It's a very interesting report and very useful, and the work that you are doing is obviously very valuable and very much appreciated by this committee as well. So thank you, Gareth.
Thank you very much. I'll pass those comments on to the rest of the team.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, moving on now to item number 8. Now, this is the report of the External Auditor, and Cameron is here to present it. Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to assume the report's taken as read and just highlight a few of the key points.
Absolutely.
In terms of the work that we do that isn't the audit, so there's 3 bits of assurance work we do in terms of grant claims. Teachers' pensions, that work was completed in November with no issues arising that need to report, so that was submitted off. Pooling of housing capital receipts return, which sounds grander than it is. We completed that work in February and that's been submitted off with no issues arising. We also do work in an agreement between yourselves and the DWP around about benefits. We shouldn't really call it housing benefits because it's slightly more subtle than that. The work's nearly finished, but we have found some errors, and where we find errors, we've got to do another sample. So we're busy working with the council's team just to get that finished off, to get that reported off through to DWP, hopefully later this month. And I should say, it's not uncommon to find errors in benefits claims. It's very rare when we don't. Across the country. So it's nothing specific to concern yourselves around about, I don't think. Okay. In terms of the accounts, you'll see from the table that's in the report the work that's complete to date and whether or not there's anything significant arising. The 3 or 4 key areas that are ongoing are property, plant and equipment valuations. You remember that there were some issues in that area last year. Because we find issues, we increase the sample because there's obviously a greater risk. We've done more work again this year and we've found some more errors which need to be addressed. So we're working with Jan and her team just now to understand the implications of those. But on the face of it at the moment, we think there'll probably be a material correction to the accounts, possibly in a prior year, because some of the valuations are out of date by some distance. Pensions, the council's already amended the original draft accounts for this. Nothing you could really do about this one. It looks like a big number, that 44 million. But essentially what happens is the pension fund gives the actuary the asset values at a point in time, normally around about May. The actuary uses that to work out what the different entries should be in the council's accounts. You get the letter, you reflect that in the accounts. And in most normal years in the past, there'd be a small change between then and sort of September time. But because of the way the markets have been over the last couple of years, that final quarter, there's been some really big movements. And in practical terms, what that's meant for yourself is the change in the asset values for that quarter, your share of that has been that 44 million. So essentially what happens is Jan requests an updated letter and that gets revised in the accounts, and we do more work on that revised letter. So it is what it is, that one really, and we probably all would have predicted this was going to be an issue, just because any of us that ever spend any time looking at what's happening in terms of the stock market would probably recognise that's happened. Other biggie is around about infrastructure, roads, bridges, culverts, that sort of thing. You'll recall last year we had an issue around about this. It took quite a bit of extra work. Quite a lot of assets were written out last year because we identified that you had assets in your balance sheet you didn't own. So what the council did was looked at that class of assets and worked out there were quite a few that you didn't own and wrote all of that out, and that was fine. And we made a recommendation around about doing a more written branch review of the asset register at that point in time. So the council's done that and identified some lines in the asset register. It can't prove the asset exists or that you own it because it's not clear what the asset actually is. So what the council's done is written that out, which sounds like common sense, but the issue it gives us is we don't know now whether or not your infrastructure assets in the balance sheet are complete. As in, have you written stuff out you do actually own? Because at the moment you can't say it. So we've asked the council to have another look at that area. In the meantime, it's a linked issue is blown up nationally around about the way that infrastructure assets are accounted for at the point they're replaced. So what you should do, simplistically put, is if you build a new road, you should de-recognise the remaining value of the road that's replaced and recognise the new road, the value of the new road in your accounts in the asset register. That's not consistently well done across the country, and I'm being quite diplomatic in that turn of phrase. So that is an ongoing issue, I think, and we're expecting some announcements about that in the very near future, which Jan hopefully is aware of. If not, I'll brief her separately. Other issues, the main one really is around about the group, and there's a couple of issues. The first one's not in this report, but I can brief you because the manager and I were discussing it this morning. Last year's accounts, you'll recall, there was a claim in relation to Farrens. And there's been a payment made to Farrens over the last 12 months that's reflected in advance accounts. But there was still in the draft accounts for advance, and therefore in your group, a remaining liability for the potential sums you might have to pay. So we spent some time looking at Advance's views on the probability of having to pay out, and also the experts at Advance's commission to look at that as well. In our view, the principles of IS 37 aren't met in terms of the need to make a provision in the accounts. Contingent liability may or may not be appropriate, and we're still discussing that point. Essentially what that means is we think that should be reversed out. So Advance are taking that provision out of the accounts, and what that does is increases their P&L reserve, and also will increase the P&L reserve for the group. Yeah, so an increase in usable reserves. The second point is in revisiting the consolidation process, council officers have identified that something that's in advance accounts called a revaluation reserve has been treated as if it's a revaluation reserve of a council, and it's a different thing. So what essentially that means is there's a misclassification in the council's group accounts, not advance, between usable and unusable reserves. So what needs to happen is the amount has to be transferred out of unusable reserves into usable. Not cash, should be clear about that, not a cash back reserve. We're busy working through with Jan and Alison Elson and their teams around about how that should actually be accounted for. But essentially what that probably means is the group usable reserves will increase by, I think it's circa 60 million. So it's not insignificant. But it's a non-distributable reserve in advance because it's not cash backed. So it can't be given out in dividends or anything to shareholders. It's to do solely with an increase in the valuation of assets held by Advance in the past, and then some movements in that over the years. So it relates to a period quite a while ago now. If there's questions on that, I'll try and answer them as best I can. I wasn't going to say much else, really. That's where we're at. We're still working through things. Key things, really, we still need to get bottom fundamentally are around about the PPE, the valuations, shouldn't say PPE, the land and buildings valuations, and the infrastructure point.
Okay.
And we've got bits and pieces of samples and things still to finish as well, but that's broadly where those audits are. You'll see on value for money, clearly the Solace review that's underway at the moment is quite key to make sure that we reflect anything coming out of that in our VFM work. So that's sort of not paused quite because we're still looking at certain elements just now, but clearly not trying to get into the way of the people doing that review at the same time.
Okay.
So I'm happy, and that applies before Councillor Towns asks me, and he probably will, around about what that means for the annual governance statement, and broadly the same thing applies. That the Solace review is quite key to that as well. Things that may come out of that may well relate to the 2021 year, and therefore it may be that there are other weaknesses and actions the council has to take that should be reflected in that final version of the annual governance statement. So we're going to wait until that review is complete before we actually conclude on that.
Okay. Fine. Well, that is admirably clear. Thank you. We have some questions. Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just sort of one quick comment and then a couple of quick questions. So the comment is around about the Farrens claim. I mean, I think it's good that we're finally able to draw a line under this. You know, I remember sitting in Audit as the portfolio holder a year ago in January and February last year, hearing all sorts of horror stories about what might happen with Farrens, and you know, I think the officers both at Advance and within the council's finance team and within the Regen team here deserve absolute credit for actually seeing off this claim. And you know, we were talking about possibly £8 million in claims, and it's, you know, the amount that's been paid is significantly lower than that. So you know, it's good work, and it's good to finally draw a line under it. The first question is around the sort of the timetable. And I was going to ask this Jan earlier, but I thought I'd hold it until now. But we're sort of almost at a bus stop of annual accounts with three lots going to arrive at once. And I guess it's just a question around we know that the governance report that's underway is going to report by the end of April. so that any sort of conclusions from that hopefully can then be considered. But do you have any indication at all, or any idea at all, whether how quickly we might be able to close down the value for money statement in the 1920 accounts, reach a value for money statement in the 2021 accounts, and then a sort of wider question possibly for both you and Jan around the 21-22 accounts is are we actually, do we think it's a realistic prospect to get things onto track to the to the sort of statutory timetable? So that might be a sort of predicting the future question. You might not be able to do that. And then finally, a very simple question about the revaluation in advance, about whether it actually has any impact on their corporation tax. It doesn't. You said it doesn't have any impact on cash, obviously, but does it give them a bigger tax bill?
I'll start with that last one because I remember the answer to that. That's probably a question you'll need to ask Jan, because I didn't ask that explicit question of the advanced audit team this morning. In terms of, in no particular order, so the Farns claim is ongoing. Our view is that the probability, so the way you account for provision, if it's probable, you should account for it and recognise the liability in your balance sheet. If there's still a risk, potentially, but it's improbable, so less than 50%, then you would report the fact there's an ongoing claim, but you wouldn't recognise the liability in the balance sheet. So what we've said is, based on the evidence we've seen, it looks improbable, but that doesn't mean the claim's finished. So it's just a key point just to reflect on. The second point was in relation to the value for money side of things, I think. So 1920, when we have a clear idea of the issues that may or may not relate to that year, we will conclude on those. My gut feeling is it will be a qualified value for money conclusion for 1920, which I think we've been pretty clear on from the start. That then goes through an internal process of a second partner review. It has, because you're a group, it has to go through our central technical quality team to make sure that everybody's comfortable with the wording and the evidence we've gathered to reach that conclusion. So that takes a bit of time, but not a huge amount of time, given that everybody's pretty aware of where things are at. In terms of 2021, so the requirements are slightly different. We would need to consider anything arising from that that could require a significant weakness to be reported and a significant recommendation. Therefore, it very much depends on what's actually identified in the review, if anything. Yeah. If it's one thing, that might be quite quick. If it's myriad things, it might be a little bit longer. And clearly, anything that's of serious significance would be something we'd have to consider the use of statutory powers. So either statutory recommendations, public interest report, and there's always the risk that something's JRable if it's so serious. And that really is difficult to predict at this stage. In terms of the getting back on track, probably aware, Councillor Oliver, that last year I think 9% of local government bodies were actually signed off in terms of the financial statements by the deadline. Sorry, not the deadline, by the timetable for publishing audited accounts, which is more accurate. Clearly that's been recognised with a move back to November for this year. And my prediction at the moment would probably be November is going to be a bit of a push, but it might depend on when we manage to get rid of 2021. So I'm being slightly light on my feet and not committing to something. No, but I'll tell you one thing, and then a couple of months' time I'm saying something different, and that would be silly.
Okay. Well, I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, obviously we can't expect you to be held to these sort of dates, but it's good to have a rough framework, a rough idea about where we're going with this. Does that answer your question, Councillor Oliver? Okay. Do we have any more for Cameron while we've got him? Okay. David, did I see that? Okay. Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that. That was a very clear report as usual, and I think that we'll watch this space and see how things pan out. But obviously, there's plenty of work still to be done by external audit in the near future. So, thank you very much, Cameron. Item number 9, the report of the Acting Head of Internal Audit and Risk Management. This is the Audit Committee Work Programme for 22-23. Kevin, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair, this is an administrative report which we bring to committee in each March, just with the proposed work programme for the committee for the coming year for 2022-23. As normal, Chair, we've liaised with all normal report authors to pull together the proposed timetable of reports, which are on pages 4 and 5 of the paper. As always, this is a rough guide. Nothing is set in stone, and things can move and flex as needed. But obviously, it's just helpful to lay out a rough programme of reports that the committee can expect to receive during the coming year. At the time of writing, we did comment around, in line with the role of the committee as Group Audit Committee. So in line with previous things previously agreed by the committee, we've just included every meeting a standard update on internal audit work in relation to active group entities. Since we wrote the report, obviously at the moment the main non-dormant group entity is Advanced Northumberland, and we're now in the process of putting together a bit of a work programme relating to Audit Committee at Advanced Northumberland, so it would make sense to dovetail those two work programmes in a little bit more structured way for Group Audit Committee. It's just that's work which is kind of in progress. So at the moment we've just left a standard agenda item on each meeting, and we can just work that up and liaise with yourself as chair and then the committee at a future meeting, just to see if we need to tweak that work programme in respect to the Group Audit Committee role. But happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I'll just mention, because I think it does pertain to this, because it is a very clear work programme with dates and deliverables in there, that I'm proposing to slightly change the way we do the minutes for this meeting, for this committee, in the sense that we don't have as yet an action pad, I should say, where we capture actions, so that we know at every meeting that we actually, this was agreed at a previous meeting, has it been actioned, and the person who said they were going to action it. I've been talking to Andrea, our secretary for the meeting, about how we can actually get round this problem. She suggested that several of the committees in the council already have something similar, an action pad which basically takes not just the minutes of what's said and then buries the actions somewhere in the minutes, but actually puts a clear table at the back of the minutes, saying this was agreed and this is going to be done and this person is going to do it. This actually, I think, Kevin, fits very nicely in terms of an action pad, because this is a nice clear framework of what's internal audit is going to be doing over the year and what's going to be delivered as well for the committee. So I think that will fit in there quite well. So I draw that the committee's attention. We're going to hopefully start that new process in May in the next meeting. But it's perfectly in line with what other committees in the council are doing, because I think it'll help this committee to not lose anything between the cracks, if you like. So we don't agree to receive a report, for instance, and then not receive it and forget that we asked to receive it. That sort of thing would be caught by an action plan. So we always make sure we have it front and centre and we can see what we're looking at. So if everybody's in agreement with that as a way forward, that's just on the back. I've slightly hijacked your piece there, Kevin, but it's the way to take this forward. And I do think this is a very useful document. So I'll open it up for questions if anybody has any for Kevin. Councillor Oliver.
It may not be a question for Kevin, it might be one for Jan, but Kevin mentioned non-dormant subsidiaries in advance, but we've also got another non-dormant subsidiary, NAHL, and I just wondered, we'd had an update back end of last year that contract with the Chinese consultancy was paused. Is there any update on that? I think we heard about it at the last meeting, and nobody seemed to know whether it was going ahead. Has that been clarified since?
Okay. Well, I don't have it, Kevin.
So, Chair, I'll respond in part to Councillor Oliver's question, but I would have to defer to Jan for the second part. So maybe just to clarify the wording that I sort of said in terms of non-dormant companies that we provide internal audit services for. So as I think I've mentioned at previous meetings of the committee, we've talked around the internal audit risk management services which will be needed for Northumberland Enterprise Holdings Limited. That's ongoing with a view to that starting from April. So you're quite correct, that would include any work that we do on that from that point on as well as under that agenda item. As to the specific question around that contract, I'd have to defer to Jan.
Thank you. Is Jan still on the line? No.
I think should we just?
Sorry,
we'll get. She is.
We've still got. I thought you might be there, Jan.
Sorry,
Did you follow that? Sorry, Jan, we're dragging you back in again. But did you follow the question from Councillor Oliver?
I did. So At the last Cabinet, we presented the quarterly financial performance update for council-owned companies, and that was also discussed at Overview and Scrutiny Committee. At that time, members were advised that the Stage 3 contract was still paused, and I understand that there have been some further developments since then, and a report will be coming to Cabinet to update them on the current position. But I don't have any further details than that, Chair, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you, Jan. That's good. That answers part of your question, I think, Councillor Oliver. So, somewhere. Okay, thank you, Jan. Right, if anybody has any more questions for Kevin on this paper? No? Okay, well, for this paper, I think, Kevin, it's recommended that the Audit Committee agrees the proposed core business work programme set out in the report for 22-23, that it may be necessary to change or adapt the proposed reports to be considered to ensure optimum timing, that the committee will receive additional reports on an ad hoc items business arising during the year, and these relate to its responsibilities under its terms of reference, and that work is ongoing to establish a work programme to allow the committee to demonstrate how it discharges its responsibilities as Group Audit Committee for all group entities as set out in the Group Audit Committee's terms of reference. And this will be reported to a future meeting of Audit Committee. So can we agree all of those items on the proposal, please? Yeah, show of hands. Yeah, we'll take that as agreed. Thank you. And thank you, Kevin, for that. Okay. Urgent business, we don't have any. Nothing's been brought to my attention, so we'll pass on item 10. The date of the next meeting is Wednesday, the 25th of May at the usual time of 10:15. And we will now move into the closed session, which, as you know, has the exclusion of press and public and isn't streamed on YouTube. We do need to take a proposal on show of hands. Are we prepared to do that? Yes. Yeah, thank you. So, Chris, can we switch off the